All right. So Jack Hamilton was a pitcher and he beaned Tony Conigliaro, nearly blinding him. So it was a pretty big event in his life, the pitcher's life. Well, and in the batter's life. 30 years later, he was interviewed and he recalled that he thinks about this event every time a guy gets hit on TV. He remembers that it occurred in the sixth inning when the score was 2-1, that Conigliaro was the eighth batter, that it was a daytime game, and that he agonized over whether to return to Fenway with the Angels on the next road trip, because he played for the Angels. So this is Jack Hamilton's generated recall of this very dramatic event that he says, 30 years later, he thinks about it every time some other pitcher hits a batter. He thinks about it every time. Here's poor Tony Conigliaro after the beaning. Inaccuracies. I can't say whether he really does think about it every time a guy gets hit on TV, but I can say it was the fourth inning, not the sixth inning. The score was 0-0. Conigliaro was the sixth batter, not the eighth batter. It was a night game. Now that's a pretty dramatic error right there. And it was the Angels' final road trip of the season. And it's possible that he's mixing and he's saying the next time the Angels were supposed to go to Fenway, he, agonized about it. So maybe he didn't mean that season. So that one I'll give him. But he was very confident it was the sixth inning. He was very confident about the score. He was very confident about the batting order. He knew it was a day game when it was in fact a night game. Some of these are, for those of us who don't play baseball and, baseball is all about statistics and stuff, we might be thinking to ourselves, what's really the difference between the fourth and the sixth inning, or the sixth and the eighth batter, or, who cares if it's 0-0, 2-1, that's practically the same thing. They're differing by very little. Like, what's the difference? But his confidence is what the difference is. He was describing it as if these were all just facts. And what's interesting is these errors that he made in the facts surrounding what was a dramatic and traumatic event for him, as much as, well, probably not as much, certainly not physically as much as it was for the batter, right? So why would he make these mistakes? Well, some of these mistakes occur because of, the kinds of assumptions that he's making as he's talking about the event. Now, when we talk about retrieval, there are implicit pieces of information that are stored in our memories. And that's really not what we're talking about here, right? Procedural memory, that's really a bottom-up process. Implicit memories, you usually don't have any conscious sense of recalling this procedural memory. And really, when we use implicit tasks, the memory is just indirectly reflected. It's hard to tell what procedural memories a person actually holds. So this isn't really what we're talking about with the example with the pitcher. We're talking about explicit memories. And with explicit memories, there's always this elaboration and organization that goes on. And that's the source of the errors that the pitcher is making when recalling the events. Explicit memories are, a top-down process. You impose meaning on the contents of the memory as you're retrieving it, so that it makes consistent sense with the last time you retrieved it, or with what's going on right now. You have a sense of conscious recollection when you're pulling out explicit memories. And when we test people's memory, we really are testing their explicit memories, because we can have direct insight into what they can say or what they can produce for us. And so this is usually what's being measured in a memory test, is explicit memory. So think about over the 30 years between the beaning and the recollection, and think about all the different elaborations and organizations that may have been imposed on his explicit memory. Like every time he recalled that memory, and you got to imagine over the course of his career, he was probably asked about it a lot, let alone once he retired, he was probably asked about it a lot. He probably told the story frequently. Apparently it was quite the big scandal, because there was a big argument about whether he did it on purpose or not. a whole bunch of things. So he was sort of under scrutiny following the event, things like that. So you can imagine that he elaborated on the memory and organized it in a way that led him to ultimately have some details wrong. Right? Like memory is never perfect. It's not a video recording of what happened and let's just go to the tape. It's never like that. Every time you pull a memory out and think about it, new details can get stored away with that memory. And so it's completely impossible that he always told the correct inning previously, but somebody corrected him. And then he encoded their correction into it, their what turns out to be their wrong correction. And now that, for all intents and purposes, has become the inning for him, right? Maybe he mixed a couple of beanings together. He's got the really dramatic one that we're talking about. And then he probably, as a pitcher, probably hit more than one batter in his lifetime. And maybe he somehow mixed them together, right? By organizing times I beaned a batter into one coherent unit, he probably ended up mixing some of them up, right? There are a lot of things in this explicit memory story that would explain how he came 30 years later to have so many details wrong. So it's really super important to leave you with this idea that memory is not perfect, that it's completely contingent upon what was going on at the time, the context, what's going on the next time you retrieve it. The ability to store it is really dependent on your encoding strategies, and the ability to retrieve it is based on your retrieval strategies, right? Like, there are so many opportunities for memory to fail, and we're going to talk about those failures in another chapter, forgetting and memory construction and other kinds of things. So we will pick that up in another chapter. So I will see you guys then.